Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is part 6 of our series of grade 1 to grade 3 jazz band repertoire that's been recommended to us. And I'm here with great writer Terry White. Again, Craig Skeffington was busy, so that's why you're here. I'm just joking.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about his chart.
Yeah, so that was Trofeo de Bolos by Craig Skeffington.
Yeah, it's a great chart. And I made a note to myself. I really consider this part of it's a jazz staple with high school repertoire right now. I hear it performed quite often. And
a third tune typically, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it's a chart that lends itself to a director who can be artistically creative without, I think, ruining the composer's intent. I mean, just subtle dynamic things, especially the ensemble section. And if you got to be careful, because there are some bands who will play this and it's a blast fest from beginning to end. And that's not what Craig intended at all.
Also, for anybody who doesn't know Craig, he's very receptive on Facebook and many other places. So he would love if you reached out as you would, if you have questions about his charts or anything like that.
Yeah.
So the story about that one. So this was commissioned by Cheyenne Priest, right?
Yes.
Up in Old Town Middle School. Leonard Middle School. And there's this old joke about people who go to the State Jazz Festival and try to win the trophy instead of making good music. It's all about winning what we call the bowling trophy.
That's our former mentor, Norm Richardson, quoted the phrase, the bowling trophy.
Yeah. We call it the bowling trophy. So I think, didn't she, I'm going to be corrected on this one, but she had a kid in middle school who had a Spanish project or something. So what ended up being given to her was this sign that says Trofeo de Bolos, which is apparently bowling trophy in Spanish. Maybe it's not, I don't know. But so then she had Craig write a chart, and that was the title of it. So
yeah. And anytime I do the festivals that include clinics working with the band, I always enjoy working with them on this chart. It's a lot of fun, and they get a kick out of that story about how the title came about. I mean, Craig is very creative with his titles. I struggle. I'd still be doing tune 1, tune 2, tune 3, but he comes up with some very clever titles.
Yep. Okay, so the next tune is listed in Alfred Bellwin as grade 2. I've put it into grade 3. I could be mistaken, but this is a tune called Come Sunday, which is originally very different in the original Duke Ellington version. But Rick Hirsch, I think, has done a masterful job on this.
He's a really creative writer. And then it goes back to, it doesn't matter how it's listed in the catalog or what the color of the cover is for the, if it works for your ensemble, then play it.
And there's a couple of written solos here for brass as well. So this is a very playable, but again, it's very artistically high-minded. Again, with some Ellington stuff, the drummer plays like timpani mallets on the toms and things like that. So this is one of those charts. So here's Come Sunday, arranged by Rick Hirsch. if you played that at a jazz festival, you might be one band in a string of 20. Like, how many other bands in their middle tune are going to have timpani mallets kind of playing,
Right, sure.
playing all the drums?
Right.
So it's just a completely different kind of sound.
It's creative and it's refreshing from my standpoint,
As a judge,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
that's always hard because I want to play. Like, a good chart is good chart. I don't care if another band's playing it. My kids haven't played it. I want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But from your viewpoint, you're hearing, if you hear something fresh and new like that, that makes that band stand out a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you hear those, in some of the charts where the trouble spots are. And if you got 4 bands come out and play the same chart, I mean, they could all play them well, but where the challenges in the chart are, and that's what you're listening for. I think and that goes back to the directors that, get the new issues catalog, and that's a really cool chart. And yeah, but there's a lot of great music prior to that. And don't be afraid to go back into the file cabinet. And
one thing I always check out, if I see there's a chart and it says by Duke Ellington, arranged by, I always check it out. I don't always like it, but a lot of times they're more accessible versions of those tunes.
I know in your library, you've got a pretty extensive library, a lot you've done since you've been there, but that library goes back
Before,
for
yeah,
decades,
way before.
And some charts that are long out of print. But there's one that I did many years ago called Grand Central Suite by Bill Holcomb. And it's a killing chart. I probably will never hear it again because it's just out of print and people aren't aware of it. But when we played that at festival, we did it at a festival in Toronto, and the judges were knocked out with it. It's one of those, slow, fast, tunes that it was a production number, so it involved a lot of rehearsal time, but it was well worth it. And there's a lot of times, and I used to fall into this. I did a production chart one time, and the comment from one of the adjudicators was, it's performed very well, but I often think is the amount of time you had to spend to get it to that level worth it.
You could have done a lot of charts.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, next chart is Autumn Leaves, which is a Son Montuno written by Michelle Fernandez. If you haven't checked it out, episode number 106 of the Growing Band Director podcast was really awesome because Michelle basically sent me a clinic she did with Miami-Dade School Studio Arts or so, I forget. But this good middle school band, and she clinics them about being authentic in this style. So if they haven't checked it out, you can hear Michelle clinic a band on this tune. So again, this tune, if people don't know Autumn Leaves, one reason why I love this tune is it's a great improvisation tune. It's all either G minor or B flat. So they can really get away with 2 scales when they improvise.
And it's a refreshing take on the melody of this tune. That's really important. Again, from my standpoint as a listener, I'm going to hear Autumn Leaves. Okay. Ba, da, 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 da. That's been done and done and done. And you're kind of looking for something that's not weird, but something that's just a different take. This trombones get a significant part of this, and the Latin rhythms are authentically notated that make it work. Again, you can't just go back and tell kids, well, just play Latin, because it doesn't work that way.
So if you hear this and you actually go, you know what, I actually might use this year, wouldn't it be great if you had Michelle Fernandez actually work with your group? So that's why I mentioned episode number 106, because a lot of what she says to that group is what she'd say to my group and she'd say to everybody else's group
absolutely.
Too. So you should check that out. Here's Autumn Leaves, arranged by Michelle Fernandez. what's fascinating when you talk to Michelle or you're talking about Latin jazz music or Afro Latin music, like the exact rhythms that are written down on these authentic charts are really important. Because I learned, like, my drummer is playing the pattern, but he might have been adding a count 4 where there was a rest before, and then Michelle would say, you can't play that pattern because that's a Brazilian pattern,
Right.
not a Cuban pattern. It's like saying New York is just like LA. That's offensive to somebody in Cuba to actually play that rhythm wrong. So the good thing about Michelle's music is that it's very accurately written. So, if you play with, what does she say? If you play what's on the paper, you're going to sound like you're from Cuba.
Right. And that's so important because I'm not as knowledgeable about those things.
Same.
So if I'm going to write something that I'm not really sure and I think I might offend somebody, I'm making phone calls. The recent Latin chart, I was all over Brad Chomsky about, okay, I need some help with here. There's gyro, there's all kinds of things. You just can't say play gyro.
Yeah.
There's a rhythm they've got to follow. And when we talking to the editor, I said, we really need to have these things. He said, well, we don't have enough room on the score for that. I said, yeah, but we could provide the part. So if they are able to do it, at least we're giving them an authentic part, knowing full well a lot of directors, just they'll tolerate whatever the kid plays.
Yeah.
You're not really doing the kid in service there.
Yeah. There's a chart on here that I have. If you check out this document that we'll put out with the links to all these as well. It's called True North by Mike Dana, who's a great writer. This is I think it's Kendor maybe it's Gateway series, but it might even be written as a grade 2. I called it a 3, but the reason I like it almost reminds me of one of those contemporary, almost Maria Schneider-like charts where it's like, I think it's alto and bass get the melody in the beginning, but it's like a contemporary tune, but it's pretty simple.
I've used several of Mike's charts over the years, my middle schools and a couple of festivals. And he's a great writer. This one, when I first heard it, that's exactly what I thought of. There isn't a lot of real solid contemporary sounding, for younger bands. And this is spot on. I think if you're looking for it, you don't have to jump from Lil Darlin to Maria Schneider or Pat Metheny or any of that stuff. I mean, it's great music, but it's challenging. This would work. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's very accessible and refreshing, I think.
Yeah. So again, we don't have the recording of that because it's not something we have access to, but you can check it out online. It's called True North by Mike Dana. We do have 2 more tunes that we have access to that we're going to use. This one is, again, one of my top 5 favorite charts. This is called The Mudbug Strut by Paul Baker. It is based on When the Saints Go Marching In. It features, you can use sousaphone on it. You need to have a pretty good drummer, and there's a great clarinet part on it too. So lots of second line New Orleans jazz sounds.
That's one of the charts. It's well worth the effort you put into it. To get it. It's fun for the kids to play. From a historical standpoint, it's very educational, especially if you can get the sousaphone and clarinet thing there.
Yeah. So here's Mudbug Strut. that tune is a hoot. It's such good music.
Oh, it's great. It's fun music, happy music, you know. And my wife will mention this about certain Latin tunes. She calls it wiggle music. Like, and you can't sit still when you hear things like that. Something's moving. Your toes are tapping, or you know, it's great music and great teaching music.
And if you don't have the clarinet on that or sousaphone, it still works. It's written other places. It just adds more to the style. Yeah, so we have one chart left. Again, if you guys have checked out this episode, but not some of the other 5, I suggest you check them out. Again, even if your band is burning the grade 1, 2, and 3, there's lots of stuff throughout there that would be very usable in lots of different ways. The last tune we're going to listen to is by Chris Berg, who's a friend of ours. This is another New Orleans-inspired tune called Kick It.
Yeah, and you know, nobody writes better funk than Chris. And his bass lines will be spot on.
Okay, he's a bass player.
Yep, and it's I think very important for people not just to play the chicken. It's one of his most popular arrangements, but he writes great funk, and when he does a style, he knows the style.
Yep.
Like for me to write some of those things, that's out of my wheelhouse. You know, it would be kind of weird sounding.
Yep.
But he's totally got it. You know.
So here's Kick It, Chris Berg.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like your traditional second line chart. It's very contemporary, very hip. You know, it's a great chart. Well worth the effort to put into it.
This has been a lot of fun. Again, if you've listened to this one and not the other ones, I urge you to go back to it. Thank you for taking the time on this, Terry.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I love talking charts, and it's the profession is really what it is when you refer to it. And the better we can get at it, and I go back to some of my earlier comments in one of your earlier videos, the more we can talk to each other and help each other, just suggestions. You know, there are times you have ensembles, you're just not sure what would work with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and by talking to other people, you find out, you know, how many of these charts that do a lot of band, geez, I didn't know about that chart.
Yep.
Well, now you do.
And if people don't know, I'm sure a lot of arrangers are this way, but Terry, you have just hundreds of charts that are not published, that are
Right.
that are just sitting that, if people want to reach out to you and they said, hey, do you have a chart on this, or what do you suggest for this? I'm sure you'd have more
Well,
advice
that's the
as well.
advantage of being old and having taught a long time, that, you write for your own kids, and Tom Lazat,
Yeah.
and, the library built up, you start writing, 10 charts a year over.
I remember saying, I have an alto singer and I want to do something Ellington. What do you have? All right, here's 15 charts I've done.
And you can always adapt something. That's more common today.
Yeah.
One of the schools wanted to had a guitar player. It was a feature. Wonderful guitar player. I happened to have a chart that was a piano feature that was easily transferable over and worked really well for the band.
Yeah.
So, don't be shy, and don't be afraid to ask people for suggestions and ideas, and bring people in to work with your band. That's so important. Second set of eyes and ears, third set,
Mm-hmm.
How many times I've gone into Craig Skeffington's rehearsal to drop off something and say, hey, T, what do you hear? And they're not insecure about having somebody work with the band or just listen, offer up a suggestion. You know? So
Thanks again.
great. It's fun.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.